Shalom and welcome to the Israel Policy Pod. I'm Neri Zilber, a journalist based in Tel Aviv and a policy advisor to Israel Policy Forum. Dan Meridor is back with us for an important discussion about the renewed war in Gaza and, just as important, the firing earlier this week of Shin Bet chief Ronen Bar by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the renewed push by his government, again, sadly and tragically, to go after Israel's judicial and legal authorities. Dan Meridor was, of course, the cabinet secretary in the 1980s for the Likud governments of Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir, and later a Knesset member for the Likud. He then went on to serve as Minister of Justice and Minister of Finance in Netanyahu's first government in the 1990s, and later in Bibi's second government in 2009, Dan served as Deputy Prime Minister and Intelligence Minister. Meridor famously broke with the Likud and Netanyahu twice, and in recent years has become a sharp critic of the party and the prime minister. And it's fair to say no one knows both as well as Dan Meridor. And I urge all of you to check out his last appearance on this podcast on January 11th, 2023, if you can believe it, as a companion episode for this one, which was just as terrific. But before we get to Dan, a few thoughts from me. So at the top, Dan and I do discuss the renewed fighting in Gaza, but the bulk of our conversation is dedicated to domestic Israeli affairs and the Ronen Bar saga. So here's a little state of play for why the ceasefire in Gaza just collapsed earlier this morning. And we're recording this on Tuesday afternoon, Tel Aviv time. So basically, what just happened? In recent weeks, to start off with, the U.S. and Israel have been trying to get Hamas to agree to what they call a bridge proposal to extend the ceasefire that was signed in January, and that, as we all know, officially ended on March 1st. What was in this bridge proposal? Well, depending on the day and depending on the official, Hamas was required to release between 5 to 11 living hostages, hostages still alive, thankfully, and perhaps maybe more hostages that are no longer alive, in return for extending the ceasefire through Passover next month. Basically another 40, 50-day ceasefire. That was what was in the works. And in the meantime, talks over the elusive second stage of the ceasefire deal were to begin. That was the plan. Hamas late last week said it would be willing to release 5 hostages, basically the dual Israeli-American nationals still held hostage in Gaza, but only one of whom, Idan Alexander, is still alive. Both the U.S. and Israel said this was unacceptable and that there was a deadline for Hamas to effectively soften its position. That deadline has now apparently passed. The IDF launching renewed and wide-scale airstrikes all across the Gaza Strip. And the IDF has also threatened to escalate even further, as we all know, likely including a mass ground invasion of the Strip. Again, has to be said. So now Hamas has a serious decision to make. It come back in the coming hours and days and say, hey, we've reconsidered the errors of our ways. We'll cave and soften our position and give you what you want in order to extend the ceasefire for a few more weeks, like we said, through Pesach or late April. That's one option, which would be, I think, preferable for all parties involved. The other option for Hamas, because I really don't think Israel and Netanyahu are bluffing, is for Hamas to decide we're not caving. Israel and the Trump administration basically reneged on the original deal from last January, which called for stage 2 talks to have already begun over a month ago, and that we, i.e. Hamas, were promised a genuine negotiation to end the war and a fuller Israeli withdrawal in early March from much of the Gaza Strip, including the Philadelphia corridor at the very south on the border with Egypt. None of those things happened, and even if the truce, shall we say, is extended for a few more weeks, we'll all, and now I'm talking about all of us, the royal we, we'll all just be back here in late April having the same discussion about the very deep gaps and the divide between Israel and Hamas over stage 2 of any ceasefire deal. So fundamentally, 17 months into this war, the diplomatic battle lines are still basically the same and haven't moved. Netanyahu wants Hamas to release all the hostages and to effectively surrender. Hamas wants to survive. It's not willing to lay down its arms, and it knows that its only insurance policy is exactly the hostages, who are now, we need to stress this again and again, very much in even greater danger than they were yesterday. We all have to be clear-eyed about that, about the fate of the hostages as the war is renewed in Gaza. Okay, let's get to Dan Meridor. Hi, Dan. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hello. Good to be with you.
It's really my pleasure, Dan. At the beginning of the week, I wanted to bring someone on that had both real-world practical knowledge of these types of developments that we've seen in recent days, and also a historical perspective. So I'm really delighted that you're back on with us. And if you recall, you were on in January 2023, the first time, to discuss very similar matters. There's obviously a lot going on these days. And I initially wanted you on to discuss the dramatic news of the firing of Shin Bet chief Ronen Bar and the likely fallout domestically. But we got no less dramatic news just a few hours ago when early on Tuesday, Israel effectively restarted the war against Hamas in Gaza via wide-scale airstrikes. It's fair to say, I think, that the ceasefire from January has collapsed, at least for the time being. So, Dan, first question to you. What were your initial thoughts when you woke up this morning to this news with regard to Gaza specifically?
I know nothing of it in details. I know what was published in the press or I saw on the network. I'm quite concerned, to put it mildly. I don't know what the target is. What do you want to get there? You've been fighting Hamas for 15 or 16 months. We dealt them a very heavy blow with consequences, some of which were maybe somewhat difficult in terms of civilians, but Hamas was hit badly militarily. And the fact that Hamas still rules Gaza in terms of government has to do with the fact that the Israeli government did not want to help build a replacement, a substitute to Hamas, which was offered by President Biden in the beginning of the war, by Saudis, Emirates, Egyptians, based on the very weak, admittedly, Palestinian Authority and other Arab countries. As long as there is no substitute, Hamas will be there. So what can we gain now is not clear to me. What do we do now that we haven't done in 15 months? I don't know. The very troubling part of it is that we have hostages held there in the tunnels, in other awful places, for over 500 days. And in the past, some of them were killed, either mistakenly by our army or by Hamas murderers who threatened to kill them when we approach or come close to where they are. So I don't know what the benefit may be. I know what the cost may be. So I'm quite worried. We were in the process of negotiations. Hamas is ready, so they say, to release all hostages in return of the end of hostilities, of war. I think this should have been the Israeli policy from the start. This does not mean that Hamas does not say a sworn enemy, murderers, terrorists, yes, but you have to see the priority list. First, get your people out. If Hamas tomorrow morning joins the Zionist movement, then don't deal with them. But if they don't, which probably they won't, and they will again cause troubles or prepare for troubles, then there's time to deal with them later and try to do things that you think you may do now. Don't do it at the expense and at the cost of living people and bodies of people fallen or murdered. I'm not very happy about what happened tomorrow, but I have to say I don't know any details. I know what was written in the press. Admittedly, they say that there was a green light given from the White House. Mm-hmm. There's one of the things I don't really understand in the White House policies. So this is a different angle to it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't quite understand the policy and statements coming out of the White House on a daily basis. I think, yeah, we'll shelve that for the time being done. But I think it's fair to say that you come down on one side clearly in terms of the debate over what war goal should take priority, meaning on the one hand, destroying Hamas, like Netanyahu and other senior Israeli officials have vowed, and on the other side, getting all the hostages back home. Obviously, the prime minister still promises that both war goals are achievable. Many here, and not just here, think that they're mutually exclusive, and it's a binary choice. So it's fair to say that you side on one side of the argument.
No, but I want to emphasize again, they are not mutually exclusive, possibly, if they're not done at the same time. There should be a time frame here. What comes first in terms of time? And I think that it's clear that if you continue the war, restart the war, you risk the loss of life of our hostages. So this needs to come first. First, release the hostages. Then you may be able to do the second thing, completely destroy Hamas. But for that thing, which I said earlier, you need not only to destroy them militarily,
Right.
you need to offer or help or try to build a substitute. It's not clear it's going to work, but there was an offer, and it had a chance of working. And you need to do both things. You can't do just the military thing, not the political thing. And unfortunately, this government would rather have a very weak Hamas than a very strong Palestinian Authority. I have to say, it's not our fault that they are weak. They lost the election to the Hamas. Hamas has fought them, and they are fighting Hamas. But it's our interest to strengthen the Palestinian Authority. Not that they are part of us, they are them, but still, they don't do terror, they do finance people who are convicted, and I know that, but they don't do terror for over 20 years, and not strengthen Hamas. So I thought that there is a chance of trying to build an alternative. Please try to do that with support of Arab countries and many other forces in the world. So the two things I say: first, get the hostages back home. It's people you know. It's people. It's not anonym, and it's not people without names and faces. We know who they are. They are there. Their lives are threatened. Don't do that now. Later, we'll see what to do with Hamas, both negative in terms of military action and positive political action to find a replacement.
You're not going to find any disagreement here on this podcast on that point, Dan. And yes, you're right. I think it's a question of the differing time clocks, as they say here, and sequencing of events. And the hostages don't have time. And Hamas, to destroy Hamas may take years more if Israel has already been fighting for 17 months. And I agree with you as well that the Palestinian Authority controls the West Bank should be bolstered, should be propped up and strengthened, precisely so that it can compete with Hamas in Gaza and the other parts of the Palestinian territories. Again, maybe a topic for a future episode, Dan. I'm curious just to touch or to finalize the issue of this morning's news and the renewed offensive in Gaza. As someone who goes back a few years, it's fair to say, in Israeli politics, and from your personal work and familiarity with prime ministers going back to Menachem Begin, he and people like Yitzhak Shamir, Ariel Sharon, Yitzhak Rabin, these weren't exactly shrinking violets, any one of them, in terms of the use of force and security matters. How do you think, again, with the benefit of hindsight, maybe, they would have handled this moment and this kind of very difficult choice in terms of the Gaza campaign?
I hesitate. I don't want to go into describing with any certainty what one of these great people would have done, because they are not here with us.
Right.
So it's somewhat pretentious. But I think that they would say what I'm saying, but I can't give you any guarantee. There were different people, different times, but I think it's quite clear that they would have asked, as I do ask, what is the end result? What do you get in the end? How do you want to achieve it? And what is the cost side? What are you paying for this? And I think they would have learned what all of us are learning, the limits of the force after using that much force in 17 months by a much stronger army than the Hamas in a very difficult environment of people, civilians who live there. Can there be a huge achievement by a costless military operation? I think not. And I think that they would have said what I'm saying, but I can't give you any assurance. They are not here, and I don't speak for them.
No, of course not. And as you said, they're no longer with us, and we're here dealing with our current events and our current reality in Israel, which is the main reason why I wanted to have you on, Dan. The other big news of this week, and that's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu firing on Sunday Shin Bet chief Ronen Bar. We should be clear for our listeners, this is all still subject to a government decision, and already the Attorney General here, Gali Baharav-Miara, has said the legality of the move needs to be looked at and investigated, and then after that, we'll likely have appeals to the Supreme Court over the move and its legality. So I guess the first question to you, Dan, from your understanding of the way things work here, can Netanyahu actually do this? Can he actually fire Ronen Bar? After all, the Shin Bet chief does report directly to the prime minister, and Shin Bet chiefs in the past have been fired. So why is this case perhaps different?
It is a very important question, of course. It needs to be taken in a broad perspective. Mm-hmm. The Israeli democratic system is under attack for some time now. It was upgraded, this fierce attack on January 23, when we spoke last, attacks on the institutions that define Israel democracy is going on with full force. And shamefully, there is majority in the Knesset for this by some people who are racists and messianic and dangerous, and some other people who have no courage to speak their mind if their mind is the right place. The silence of so many people is deafening. You may see the same thing in another country where nobody says anything about the ruler. I don't want to mention names.
One country.
You people of the same party, but don't you see what is happening here? Mm-hmm. So it's an attack on the Attorney General, not this one only, Gali Bar of Miara. It was an attack on Avichai Mandelblit, a man that was appointed by Netanyahu, a man wearing a kippah, whose family comes from the Likud environment politically. He became an enemy and was attacked for this attack on the police chief, another kippah-wearing man, Roni al-Sheikh, and he became an extreme leftist. And the judges were accused by Netanyahu of being leftist until they proved otherwise. And there is an attack on the free press. We should control it. We can go into that. And they want to change the way you elect judges so that it will become political rather than professional. And now you see an attack on the Shin Bet head, Ronen Bar. So this is the context. One should not look at it just as a problem of authority. Do you have the authority to fire him or to appoint? Yeah, you have. But having the authority does mean that you can do whatever you like with this authority. In democracy, there's limit. You can do things. It's under your authority, but you need to follow the rules, procedural rules, substantial rules, like you should not take irrelevant motives into it. You should consider all the right motives. Like, is it normal that the man who is defended criminally in a criminal investigation will try to fire the Attorney General who is prosecuting him? Mm-hmm. There is now investigation in the Shabak against some people in the very close vicinity and proximity with the Prime Minister regarding the Qatar affair, as we say. And now the Prime Minister will fire the head of the organization that does that. Is that a conflict of interest or is it not? And so forth and so on. And the Shin Bet is a very strong organization, as it should be in every democratic country. A non-democratic country, it should be. And if it is made political, or if it is getting orders from other motives, and if the chief is sent home or fired for reasons that are totally irrelevant, then they should not be able to do it. I hope the legal system here, Attorney General on one hand, and then the court will stop this procedure, but I cannot be sure of that. We're at the beginning of the process. And again, it's the Israeli people who should try, within the framework of legal possibilities and rights, to stop this destruction of the Israeli democratic structure.
Mm-hmm. So we should mention that protests and demonstrations are planned for tonight, Tuesday night in Tel Aviv, and tomorrow, Wednesday, up in Jerusalem. So we'll see how many people actually come out. That's an open question. We'll get back to that in just a second, Dan. And you're right. There is, in the current instance, a conflict of interest between the Shin Bet, who is, like you said, investigating this alleged scandal at the very top of the Prime Minister's office, having to do with Qatar and close aides to the Prime Minister allegedly lobbying on behalf of Qatar. and so this firing may be directly related to that investigation. I'm curious, you don't have a crystal ball, but let's say that Netanyahu tries to push this firing through, and then the Attorney General or the Supreme Court potentially say, no, it's illegal, it's a conflict of interest, it's not reasonable, you can't fire Ronen Bar. What then? What maybe we'd be looking at after that happens, if it happens?
I'll answer it immediately, but I want to add one thing. The Shin Bet failed, like the army failed, the intelligence community, on October 7th. And the head of the Shin Bet, Ronen Bar, took responsibility immediately and said, we failed. I will not finish the term that I was appointed for. I will resign. So there's no problem with that. But Netanyahu didn't fire him then. Not only then, he said he will not. He will go on working with them. So there's no connection between the historic failure that exists, I have to say, and this firing that is now being pushed through. Mm-hmm. And so this is one thing. The second thing is, the Shin Bet had its own research, internal research that they have done, and they submitted their reports on their own failure. And in the report, according to the press, there are some points or some indication that the Prime Minister was warned and had to understand. And now I think that the fact that they took responsibility on themselves but said that he should have known and we told him so and so, this added something to the appetite to get rid of them. Why do they do this to him? Now back to your question. If in the end of the day, which may be very clear and very soon, there would be a court decision that you can't fire Ronen Bar, if Netanyahu ignores this, then he loses legitimacy. The government loses legitimacy in the eyes of people. I would say I would take the American Declaration of Independence. Then it's the right and the duty of people to overthrow such government. Mm-hmm. If the government doesn't abide by the law and does not abide by the court verdict, court sentence, court decision, then what legitimacy do they have? Why should we listen to them? Why should we listen to the courts if they don't listen to the courts? This is a total destruction of the democratic and efficient system of Israel. I hope it won't get there.
You and me both, Dan. But yes, I think reading in between the lines of your answer, Israel has never been in that kind of situation, so it's unclear what may happen both in the political system, but really on the streets. That's a major question to my mind. To go back to what you said, yes, the Shin Bet did launch its own internal investigation over the massive failure before and during October 7th and its role in the intelligence failure specifically. But it was very clear in its investigation and also, I think, in Ronen Bar's letter and statement on Sunday night after he was fired, that the Shin Bet actually did warn the political echelon and the prime minister about the ramifications of propping up and sending money to Hamas. And I personally know that for a fact. Out of all the bodies here in Israel, the Shin Bet were the most skeptical and the most hawkish vis-a-vis Hamas in Gaza, but they were overruled by this prime minister and, let's say, elements within the army as well. So remains to be seen. And yes, I probably agree with you as well that was a major motivation by the prime minister on top of the Qatar investigation. Dan, knowing what you know about how this country works and really how this country works in the levers of power in the shadows, could you explain to our listeners why the Shin Bet and really the person who heads the Shin Bet is so important domestically and internally in Israel? So the Shin Bet obviously responsible for counterterrorism and counterespionage, but also I think by mandate and statute, it's responsible for upholding Israeli democracy, right? So what's the fear that if someone, say, a puppet is installed at the very top of this organization by the prime minister, what harm could that have on the country?
Yes, it's not only if you install a puppet, as you say, or somebody which is personally under the prime minister and owes allegiance to him rather than to the state. It's more than that. Whoever is appointed, if Ronen is dismissed, is fired, whoever is appointed, he will remember, don't mess with me, you may be fired. So the alarming thing is here that Everybody in the organization will understand, don't get involved against the prime minister. Don't do certain things because you may be fired. So it's not only a puppet that may be replacing or somebody who listens to the personal interest of the prime minister rather than the state. It's the very firing under these circumstances creates fear or may create fear in the people who are the guardians of democracy in a way. Mm-hmm. Now, so yes, the Shin Bet has a lot of power. They do things secretly. They have secret service, like the FBI, if you like, or other services around the world. And this is why it has so much power to spy after you or me and to listen to people and to use all sorts of other measures. If this is used not for the state interest under very tight supervision of the legal system, the courts, but if it's used for political reasons, then you know where we are. By the way, in the early years of Israel, against the image that everything was nice, it was used by Ben-Gurion for political reasons. There were devices of eavesdropping in the house of Meir Yaari of the left wing. There were similar things done on what they call the right wing or the Herut people there. There was a use in the beginning. It took time to clear the air and not to allow. And for many years, I presume, and I think I know to a large extent, I was very much involved. The service was not political. It was not used for political or personal reasons. There may be, there have been mistakes. There have been things that have been done wrongly. You may remember the Shin Bet admitted in a commission of inquiry by Justice Lando to have used force in investigations. Mm-hmm. And then not to say the truth about this. It was a huge scandal in the late 80s and 90s. And the chief of the Shin Bet was removed, Avrum Shalom. So it was an organization, it is with a lot of power. This is why you need a very strong hand controlling this power. Power is needed, but the more powerful an organization is, mainly against our own civilians, our own citizens, the more supervision and restraint and checks and balances you need. If you have somebody who is loyal to you personally rather to the citizens, the states, it's very dangerous. So here we came to a point of decision. Do we have an organization that is checked by the legal system, that vows allegiance to the state and to the principles of democracy and the security of state, or can it be used directly, indirectly, for personal political reasons? This is why it's so important.
Yes, this sounds better in Hebrew than in English, but I'll say it anyway. Loyalty to the kingdom and not the king.
Yeah, we don't have kings here. As I thought until recently, don't have kings in America. And we have a ruler that was democratically elected in both places. But even a ruler that is democratically elected can do wrong things. This is what in America they usually call checks and balances. Not all the power is in one place, and no power is without limits. All powers are limited. And sometimes it works very well, sometimes it does not. But the Shin Bet is a very unique organization because of its very extreme authority to use powers like detention or eavesdropping or following people or many other things that I want to go into them now. It's not secret. And this should be used very carefully. And if as Ronen Bar said, what he was called to do is to have allegiance, to swear allegiance to the prime minister rather than the state, then we're in a very bad shape.
Yeah, extremely concerning, the knock-on and future implications. And, in terms of Ronen Bar, head of Shin Bet, he now joins or potentially could join a list of the other security chiefs that have been sent home since October 7th, like former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who was sacked by Netanyahu last November. IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi was finally pushed out and his term ended earlier this month, and various other generals. So Ronen Bar could be the next in line on top of potentially the Attorney General. And yet Netanyahu himself has refused consistently since October 7th to take any public responsibility for the failure. And he's also not set any, new date for elections to renew the mandate, which was heavily harmed for his government after the October 7th attacks. And Dan, as you know, he's consistently refused to set up a state commission of inquiry to investigate properly and bipartisanly, if that's a word, the failures leading up to it and on the day. On the issue of a state commission of inquiry, I know you have long experience with this body. This used to be a consensual issue here in Israel, right, Dan? Commissions were set up after all kinds of crises and fiascos under left-wing and right-wing governments. So why has it become so politicized and such a political hot potato now? Is it fair to say for the first time in Israeli history?
We have a law of inquiry commissions, state inquiry commissions, not political, not bipartisan, tripartisan, not partisan at all. The procedure here, which is in the law for many, many decades now, that the government can decide on the need to set an inquiry commission. But because the government itself may be under investigation, these commissions, as has happened in the past, the law says that the government does not appoint the commission that would investigate its own actions. It says that the Supreme Court Chief Justice is the authority that appoints the commission, usually headed by a former judge or a sitting judge, and other people from the public who he or she thinks should be the composition of this commission. This has been the case after the Yom Kippur War with Justice Agranat, who was the head of this commission that investigated the failures of the Yom Kippur Wars 50 and something years ago. Mm-hmm. This was the case after the Sabra and Shatila disaster in the Lebanon with the Phalange, the Christians and the Muslims. You remember that? Mm-hmm. This was the case in many, many other cases, including the Shin Bet story that I mentioned earlier. Now, it's objective. It's the Supreme Court. It's not political. And they attack this idea. They don't want a commission of inquiry. Why? I think it's very clear. They don't think they will come, they can hide the facts. I don't know anything that you don't know, but it seems that quite strange that everyone who is responsible pays a price, which he should, by leaving office. As you said, the chief of staff, head of other organizations, chief of intelligence, but the chief responsible guy who had this policy of helping Hamas, maintaining Hamas, financing Hamas through Qatar and so forth, and not managing the risks as he should have, he is not only not taking responsibility, he is the one who fires the others. They should go home.
Right.
In that time frame, I don't object to this. I think it's clear. But where is the head? Does the buck stop there? Isn't there a prime minister who was leading a policy that said, okay, we don't want to go and conquer Gaza, maybe a good policy. But don't forget, you need to manage the risks. There's a risk. Maybe it will work. Maybe it won't. So call every week the head of the intelligence, ask them, what do we know about Hamas? What do they have? What are their plans? What is our defense system if it happens? All this didn't happen. Who is responsible for that? Who is the one who said there is a logic behind maintaining or helping Hamas get finance from Qatar if we don't want a Palestinian state? And this is attributed to Netanyahu, right? Mm-hmm. So isn't there any connection? Of course there is. And they don't want this to be revealed by an authoritative body like Inquiry Commission that was agreed by all other governments that did this, and many were in the past. So what did they do? They delegitimize the system. It's the same legal system that delegitimized in case Netanyahu will be convicted in the criminal case. We don't know yet. He may be acquitted or convicted. But even if he is, of course, it's the leftist judges, the anti-Bibi judges. It's delegitimization of the system of the law, of the courts, of the attorney general, of all those who were always above reproach, and nobody ever dared attack their sincerity and decency. You may agree or not agree with the sentence or verdict. This is fine. I don't accept all the sentences or verdicts were given, or opinions. Sometimes I agree, sometimes I don't. But I know this is the body that has the right to do so. And it's the clearest and cleanest of all. And the attack on the system is exactly because of this. So it's not only shameful, it's dangerous. Because if one does everything one can without any limits to stay in power. What will happen when election day comes within not more than, I think, a year and a half?
Mm-hmm.
Will there be election? Would they change the law? Do they have a majority for this? Can they? Can they frighten the Arabs not to come and vote by all sorts of things? I don't know. So we see here rulers that want to stay in power, and some of them think there's no limit to that, and there's no boundaries. There's no line you don't cross. This is very dangerous. And I have to add something to, there is a saying in Hebrew, "Tzarat rabim chatzi nechama." If many have the same trouble, it's comforting. Mm-hmm. It's not the case, because unfortunately we are not alone. I look at the other side of the ocean, and I see in your country and in Europe a shift in the course of history. There was a trend from Second World War on, I think, and the discourse was that almost all over the world, for more democracy, human rights, rule of law, independent judiciary. You saw it all the way to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc. And in many countries, you saw more of this. This was the course all the way to the mistaken opinion of Mr. Fukuyama. And we reached the end of history. We won.
Mm-hmm.
I see backlash. Look at what happens in Europe. When France, the motherland of human rights, after America, I have to say, in 1789, the French Revolution, see the number of voters voting for Marine Le Pen, the extreme right wing, can I say half racist, if not that, in France. See what happened in the election in Germany, the Alternative für Deutschland, in Austria, the Freiheitspartei, in other European countries, not to speak of Hungary, that tasted democracy and ran away from it with Mr. Orban. See what happened in Poland. See other countries in the world. The feeling is that democracy is on the defense now. It's an attack against the basic tenets and values of democracy. And America, that was the leader of the free world, and Western Europe, there are changes or threats even coming from there. So I am, of course, concerned with my country, with Israel, in which I, as many other people, did work all the time to make it better and more just and more powerful, as we try to do. Now there's a huge storm in the opposite direction, and it helps each other. If you do this here, why won't you do it there? If you can fire people like this, appoint people that are totally inept, why only in that country, not in this country? I don't want to go deeper into that. Mm-hmm. But it's wider, broader, and more alarming. So we need to fight against it. If we don't, it's not going to end well.
No, it's definitely not going to end well. And I think many people will agree with that thesis, Dan, that at least in the Israeli context with this current prime minister, there's a backwind that he and his government feel coming out of Washington and other places, that the same language, i.e. it's a battle against the left-wing deep state, the same toolbox and procedure, right? Going after the media, going after the courts, delegitimizing, like you said, the entire system. So anyone that comes out against you is immediately an enemy of the people, even though the people oftentimes side by a wide majority against the government, at least in opinion polls. So yes, it's a dangerous and scary time all over, including here in Israel. Okay, we'll be right back after this brief message.
At this critical juncture in the war in Gaza, Israel Policy Forum experts are providing timely, clear-headed, and sober analysis on Israeli politics and Israeli-Palestinian affairs. If you rely on Israel Policy Forum for credible and thoughtful analysis, please make a gift today so that our work can continue to have an impact. Donate now at ipf.li/supportthepod or at the Support the Show link in the show notes.
Dan, I just wanted to finalize and finish up the issue of the State Commission of Inquiry. Looking back at historical precedent here in Israel, so obviously after the Yom Kippur War, that was a labor government, and a labor government acceded to a State Commission of Inquiry, and obviously it had very strong conclusions and recommendations. Under the Menachem Begin government, the Likud government that you were a part of, Saba and Shatila and the this crisis and scandal surrounding the First Lebanon War. In terms of just like the politics and the mechanism of those days, was there even a debate about setting up or allowing a state commission of inquiry to be set up? I mean, was it even an issue like it is now? Or was it just a given? Was it implied that this commission of inquiry would be set up by the Supreme Court Chief Justice?
No, I can't testify to all the cases in the past, but the one that I remember very vividly after the Sabra and Shatila massacre of the Muslims by the Christians and in the Israeli presence nearby, there was a demand for inquiry commission. The government did not want to do it in the first place. It took some days or weeks of debate in the public until the government agreed. It was not done easily, but once it agreed, the commission was set. And I'll tell you this, when the commission was set in, I can't remember the exact date, but maybe October, November of 1982. The massacre of Bashir Jumayr was in September, and the massacre in Sabra and Shatila was about some days later. A few weeks, I think, after the commission of inquiry was set. And I remember the day on February 8th, I think, of 83, some months later, when I was the secretary of the cabinet, I get a phone call from the secretary of the inquiry commission, who is the registrar of the Supreme Court, saying to me, we have our report, we'll publish it in the morning. And he sent it to me, and I took it in my hands and went to the Prime Minister's residence, this Balfour place where everybody speaks of now. And we sat there and we read the recommendation. I remember what Begin said. By law, the government is not bound to accept the recommendations. It's recommendation. It's not a decision with force of enforcement. But he said, so we can discuss whether to accept it or not. With one exception, he said. The exception is when the government sets up a commission to inquire its own actions. In that case, you can't say we don't accept. Once you set the commission, you decided on setting commission, Supreme Court set it, the Chief Justice set it, now you are bound to accept what is said about yourself. And we accepted the commission inquiry recommendations. Arik Sharon had to leave the office of defense minister and other people. I don't want to go into all details. It was not easy, but I think of when I mentioned and I have emphasized the principle that Begin said. I remember him saying it. It was me and him and maybe 2 or 3 other people in his residence. When the commission investigates the government itself, the government cannot say, I don't accept it.
So that's fascinating because it's an inherent conflict of interest, right? That if you set this commission...
Yeah, right. Officially, formally you can say we don't accept it and the public should react. But if you have a moral backbone and you don't just count votes in the parliament or even in polls, but you see what is right and what's wrong. When you are in an extreme conflict of interest, you set independent people that you agreed to set to the procedure, and Supreme Court set them, the Chief Justice. And now they come with a recommendation, say we don't accept them. If it's on other issues that do not relate to the government, some mistake of some other people, some disaster that happened, then okay, you can take the recommendation seriously. You can say we don't accept them. We say we do partially, but not when your own action are under scrutiny. And this is the procedure by law. You can't say, well, don't give a damn. You can't say this.
Right. You should not be able to say it, but I guess norms and values have changed in more recent years.
They have.
Unfortunately. And by the way, Dan, you said that you may not recall all the details. I think our listeners can agree. The recall of events over 40 years ago was very impressive. I don't remember what I did 2 weeks ago, and you brought exact dates and exact conversations with them.
If you ask me what happened 2 weeks ago, I'm not sure I remember. But what happened 4 years ago, I do. It's not the trivial thing. Yeah.
No, the important things, exactly. Remarkable. I wanted to zoom out just a little bit before we finish up, Dan. The issue, as you mentioned earlier, about the judicial overhaul writ large that we discussed at length in January 2023, right at the start of the crisis. As we've been talking about, it's back in a real way, and Netanyahu and his government and coalition are moving on several tracks. including legislation. And as mentioned, they want to fire the Attorney General herself. They don't recognize the authority of the Supreme Court, et cetera, et cetera. Back in 2023, we saw this widespread 9-month-long protest movement. Every week, sometimes multiple times during the week, the Israeli public came out in force in the biggest protest movement in Israeli history. Now, after 17 months of war, and the public, I think it's fair to say, are fairly exhausted, are you concerned that the level of pushback from the public itself on the streets, and not just on the streets, won't match the level of intensity that we saw in 2023? Is that a concern of yours, or do you think that the Israeli public may be up for another round with this Israeli government?
Well, you touched on a serious issue. It's not only the time lapse of almost 2 years now, or more than 2 years, that we have been fighting the judicial overhaul to change Israel's regime from democracy to something different, full control in one hand, no checks, no balances. Of course, it takes a lot of courage and involvement of many people in the streets, as was the case. But cynically, very, very awful cynicism, they used the war that was their failure. And now, under the very sad and very tragic feeling of people about the war and the concern that people have with their own children fighting this war. I had a grandchild who was wounded in Gaza. He's all right now. Everybody, not everybody, not the Haredim, but we all are involved in that war. And we have hostages that are there. We know the names. We hear the stories. So the attention of people, the hearts of people are very much in that. And for the government to use that mindset of people in order to push forcefully the judicial overhaul that they wanted is really the extreme example of cynicism. And yes, you tell people all your efforts should be now to stop the judicial overhaul. Not everybody understands all the intricacies and the details, and don't think of the most tragic thing that you have on your mind every day and night, the hostages and the war that goes on. So rather than the war helping to topple down this government, they use the war to strengthen their own overall regime, overall plan for their regime. So this is quite tough. I know democracy does not fall, if it ever does, usually with one revolution. It happens. No, sometimes it's step by step. So you fire this man and that man, and then you change this law and that law. And in the end, you find yourself in a different regime. So it's not the one thing that everybody stands up to. We saw an overall revolution that was offered by Netanyahu and Yariv Levin, the Minister of Justice. So we knew what was ahead of us, and there was a very impressive reaction of the Israeli public against it. I think the people are still very much against it, but their hearts and attention is divided now between the war, which is human life, and regime changes, which seem a little less dramatic and tragic. So I hope it will not make people stay home. But the cynicism of the government side is quite alarming. And you saw it in the fact that still to this day, 68 members of the Knesset, if I don't make a mistake with the numbers, do support this government. And out of 120, it's a very clear majority, and they don't lose anybody there. In the end, we need something to change there. It has to say something about no democracy, that we want to rule, don't get in our way. This is not democracy. Mm-hmm. Democracy is not only defined by majority rule. Of course, majority decides who the ruler is. It's not a king by any dynasty. It's not the pope or the rabbi who says who will do that. It's not some military coup. No, it's the people who decide who the government is, who is the ruler. But it doesn't mean that the ruler has the right to do whatever they like. Rulers that cannot tell me don't criticize the government, although they may have majority for it. This is not legitimate. The rulers cannot tell me I'm going to arrest you without any warrant or any reason. No, you can't. You have majority. Even if majority wants to do that, it's not democratic. Majority rule is not democracy. It's part of democracy. The other part, not less crucial, is the limits on majority, what they can do. But my individual rights, group rights, It's the other side. Without this, most dictators had majority. Hitler had majority. Stalin had majority. So majority is important because it's not a king, as I said. It's not somebody who by God was a Dei Gratia Rex, like in Britain. No, it's the people who choose. That is true, but they don't choose somebody to do whatever they like. Choose somebody to act according to democratic principles, according to the constitution, if you have one, or basic laws, and according to laws and legislation. You can't do whatever you like. To do whatever you like is not democracy. And if you shut down all the bodies and institutions that has to limit your force, to see that you check, that they check your force. You don't use the force just because this is your interest or even your ideas, then you are not in a democracy. And we are fighting for the soul, if you like, of the Israeli society, of the soul of Israeli democracy, as I think other people or other nations on earth are now fighting. It's a trend that is global. And you see, populism, if you like, I'll put it in a more provocative way. Populism versus democracy. Populism is going to the masses. They are legitimate, they are the people. And not trying to lead them to good things, but to follow their basic instincts. When Moses comes from Sinai, Mount Sinai, and says, don't kill, don't steal, and so forth, he did not ask the people which is what is that they want. He said, this is not right, this is wrong, don't do this. Or whether it's Immanuel Kant from Königsberg in Germany, people who teach morality don't follow the people, they lead the people. The fact that don't do this, it can be a rabbi, a priest, Martin Luther King, whoever it is, somebody who doesn't follow the instincts, the basic instincts, who says don't do certain things. In Hebrew, in our Jewish tradition, there is this known maxim, Ezu Gibor Kovesh. So who is a hero? One who controls his own instincts, not one who follows the instincts. You need to see what is right. Don't go by your impulses. Because, if people go by the instincts, you can read Charles Darwin, what happens. The survival of the fittest. No, morality is there are certain things you can't do even if you are the power, if you have the power. This is democracy. And it has to do in the end with institutions, with sharing power. And this is now under attack in many countries in the world.
Very well put, Dan. And yes, checks on the power of even a democratically elected executive, right?
Right.
That they can't just do whatever they want, pass a law, for instance, outlawing Arab Israelis from voting, or even, residents of the Florentine neighborhood of Tel Aviv from voting. Yes, they may be able to pass a law with a majority in the Knesset. Doesn't make it legal.
Even when I speak of the legal system, that is very important in the system of checks and balances, because it really has a power. It does not have to be re-elected in every 4 years, and it has to stick to the values. So you need independence of judiciary. Otherwise, if it's controlled by the government, it's not independent. But I have to say it's not enough. You may have a Supreme Court that's totally independent, but in fact follows the majority and does not follow the basic values of democracy. I'll give an example. You may remember a country that from 1776 all the way to 1860, blacks didn't vote and the Supreme Court didn't care. Until 1920, women didn't vote and the Supreme Court didn't care. You can have a Supreme Court that will follow non-democratic values. It will not fight for them. So who is the Supreme Court? Who are the people? Are they committed to democracy in the real sense of the democratic values, or are they just following the masses' instinct? The instinct is not always for the individual rights or minority rights or group rights. They sometimes follow the masses. We want to do this or that. It can be the good and bad. So you need to have the values of democracy protected, both by the independence and second by the principle, the values the Supreme Court or the legal system as a whole should stick to and defend. So these two things are now under attack.
Yeah, and it's not a coincidence that Justice Minister Yariv Levin and this government is trying to precisely change the way judges and specifically Supreme Court justices are nominated and elected.
Yeah, this is a law that they may be passing this week. It was in Israel a tradition and by law since the early 50s, over 70 years, that we have a commission of appointment. And this commission is set by 9 people, 5 of them professional, and only 4 politicians. The professionals, the judges, Supreme Court, the members of the Bar Association, they had the majority. And even the politicians, 3 were for the coalition and 1 from the opposition. So political appointments were not legitimate in a way. They had their say into it, but they did not have majority. He wants to change it. So the politician will be the majority and the judges will be the minority. So this is going to stain the whole system. If you start having judges that are appointed politically, you lose even this defense against government misuse of power. Because if the government has its own judges, which was not the Israeli case ever, then we have a huge, turning point in a bad way in our system. And this stands on the agenda now. It's part of it's maybe the heart of the overall of the system that Netanyahu and Levin and others are following now. Netanyahu maybe was not a very keen supporter of the system, but he never spoke against the legal system. Never. I was with him many years. I was more identified with the system as Minister of Justice. I defended it. I tried to protect it and so forth. But he never spoke against the system. He spoke against those who spoke against the system, even against Rav Levin.
Yep.
Till he was investigated and then indicted and now being tried. Then he was attacked. He has started the fierce attack on the system. So it's clearly personal.
Clearly personal, clearly a major shift from even what Bibi Netanyahu used to stand for. And he's carrying now not just his government, again, like you said, there's no voices of dissent even within this coalition, which is shameful, but especially the Likud party, Dan, which you were a part of for many decades. And this will be our final question, a more personal note, maybe like last time we spoke. You are a very well-known figure here in Israel due to your many years of public service. So do you get any reactions in your day-to-day life or from your friends or former friends from within the Likud party about all the things we just talked about for the past hour in terms of democratic norms, the judicial overhaul, commissions of inquiry? Do you get any reactions, positive or negative, from your former fellow travelers, shall we say, on that side of the Israeli political spectrum?
The Likud that I was part of, and maybe one of the servants of, some people can say leaders of the Likud, I don't want to use this word, but I was there quite significantly for many years. It's not the party of Likud today. It's not only somewhat different, little more to the right or left. It's entirely the opposite. The Likud's name, that was given to it by Menachem Begin, the founder of Likud, was Likud, a national liberal movement. It's very interesting to note. There are 2 sets of values. The national values, the Jewish national values, very important to us. The homeland, the Aliyah to Israel, Israel defense, Israel's future. The Jewish people, this is our interest, the national interest. But there is another set of values, the liberal values. That is to say, humanity, human rights, equality, freedom. And these are 2 different values. And the Likud, can I say, genetic code was they attempt to balance these 2, not only the national, not only the liberal. They trying to find a balance between these 2 sets of values. This was Likud, as Begin put it, which is why Likud was the party, and Begin was the one who said we need the Supreme Court that is not political and does not respond to people's wishes in the street, but is above the Knesset, defending the people against abuse of the power of majority. This was the Likud, and this was, again, with all humility, myself as the Minister of Justice, to push what we call the constitutional revolution, enacting human rights laws. This was the Likud. Mm-hmm. The national importance and the individual, or the public and the individual, the human and the state. It's this combination. This changed entirely. All the liberal or democratic side is entirely gone. You don't hear anybody speaking this language. It was not only mine. It was the Likud language. So it's not the same party. It's now a Bibi party with, like other right-wing movements in Europe, extreme right-wing. You hear the attack on strangers or people who are not like us about this above everything. I don't want to go into that, but this is not even similar or close to what it was. They're fighting against all the heritage of Menachem Begin, and again, Mutatis Mutandis, you reference myself and other people did for so many years. They want to entirely change it to the opposite direction. Do I get reaction? Yes. Some people stay in the party with a different agenda. This is why people, the Likud still has some 20 and over % in public in every poll. I don't remember the exact poll. I think of yesterday is 25 or 120, but there are others in Shas and Aguda and more extreme like the Kahana people, Ben Gvir. There are people who support this, to me, outrageous trend. There are others who left the Likud because of this. Mm-hmm. And they find political shelter or home in other places. You hear new parties that I don't want to go into names, they are there. Personally, I can say something that I don't want to sound boasting something. Because my name is quite known and my face are known to people who watch TV for the last 3, 4, 5 decades. People who see me in the street, you can walk, and they I'm nostalgic. Hey, where are you? Where are people like you? So I feel, personally, I should feel grateful, great, but it's not this. There's the yearning for something. It's not me. I represent for them something that was more rational, more balanced, and more reliable, and less cynical. So I hear it in the streets. I'm not saying I'm not in politics now. I can't. I'm not in the age and time to come back. But the feeling that there was a different Israel then is there, and we need to keep that the Israel on the course that was very successful and I think remarkably right, just to keep Israel on the track, not to let them slide into a different alley that is quite dark and alarming. So I hear it from people. If we have election, I hope we'll have election. If it's in time, I hope either quicker or somewhat earlier, we'll see a change. And I hope the new leaders, if and when they come, will understand the depth of the problem and the need to really overhaul the system to get back to the course on which we tried it for so many years.
Indeed, Dan. Repair should be the word, both after October 7th and after the domestic policies of this current government to get back on track. Couldn't agree more. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Dan, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
And we'll, like you, hope for the best in the coming days and weeks.
Let's hope for that.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, thanks again to the great Dan Meridor for his generous time and insights. Also, special thanks to our producer, Jacob Gilman, and to all of you who support Israel Policy Forum's work. Do consider making a donation to Israel Policy Forum so it can keep being a credible source of analysis and ideas on issues such as these that we all care deeply about, including this podcast. And most importantly, thank you for listening.